At the restaurant, my brother raised his glass and said, "Let's humiliate the adopted one." Again. Minutes later, a $370 bill hit the table. His card failed, and the manager walked over with news that changed everything. I'm Liam, 28, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the family's emotional punching bag with a polite smile. It's funny, if you met us from the outside, you'd probably think we were the picture of suburban normally. Mom's a retired teacher, Dad's a real estate agent, and my older brother, Evan, is the golden boy who can do no wrong. Then there's me, the adopted one, the footnote of family gatherings, the one people always forget to include in the Christmas photo until someone awkwardly says, "Oh, wait, we should get Liam in one too." I used to laugh it off. I told myself they didn't mean any harm, but that was before the dinner, the one that flipped the script. I should have known something was off when Evan texted me out of the blue. "Hey, family dinner this weekend. Everyone's coming. Don't be weird, just say yes." That last line, "don't be weird," was his signature way of reminding me I didn't quite belong. Still, I said yes. I always do. I think a small part of me still hoped that if I showed up enough times, smiled enough, contributed enough, they'd start seeing me as more than the adopted one. I didn't know this dinner would be the night they crossed a line so deep it would change everything. The restaurant Evan picked wasn't your average spot. It was one of those downtown places with marble floors, dim lighting, and waiters who make eye contact like they're silently judging your credit score. I arrived early as usual because showing up late felt disrespectful. The host led me to a large table in the corner, clearly reserved under Mr. Evan Carter. The name made me muse a little. Same last name, different treatment. I took a seat and waited, fidgeting with the menu prices that made my stomach tighten. I couldn't help but think, why this place? Why something so flashy? Then they arrived. Evan, his wife Claire, Mom, Dad, and my aunt and uncle. All smiles, laughter. The kind of energy that fills a room like a warm light, the kind that dims the moment they see me. "There's our quiet one," Evan said, pulling out his chair. "Didn't know they'd let you in here without a tie." Everyone chuckled, even Dad, who muttered something about dress codes being just suggestions. I laughed softly because what else could I do? I wasn't there to start anything. I told myself to breathe, to let it go, to survive another night. Dinner started off okay. We made small talk about work, the weather, and the new house Evan and Claire were building. 4 bedrooms, a home office, and a pool, Evan said proudly, like a man announcing a personal achievement for mankind. Mom practically glowed with pride. "You've always been so ambitious," she said, reaching for his hand. "You remind me of your father." Her eyes didn't even flick toward me when she said it. I just smiled and nodded, sipping my water to fill the silence I wasn't meant to break. At some point, the conversation turned to family traditions. Mom mentioned old Christmases, Dad talked about his barbecue skills, and my aunt brought up how Evan used to help decorate the tree every year. Then she paused. "Oh, and Liam, didn't you come to us that one Christmas?" It was like she couldn't remember if I was part of the memory or just visiting. I just nodded again. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I was there." Evan smirked. "You mean when you broke Mom's ornament?" Everyone laughed. My face burned, but I smiled anyway. It was an old joke. I was 12. It had been an accident. But for them, it was the kind of story they loved to retell, one where I was the punchline. The food arrived, steaks, wine plates that looked like art more than meals. The waiter poured the drinks, and for a brief moment the room felt calm. Then Evan raised his glass. "A toast," he said, standing. Everyone lifted their glasses with that eager family look, ready to cheer, to celebrate, to be seen. "To family," Evan said, pausing for effect. "To the people who've always been there for me, the ones who share my blood." He chuckled and looked straight at me. Except for Liam, of course. He's just the adopted one. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel in their minds. It was light-hearted. That's how they justify it later. But in that moment, it sliced through me. Even the waiter froze. My mom covered her mouth, giggling awkwardly. "Evan," she said, trying to sound disapproving but failing, "that's not nice." But she was smiling. They all were. I felt the air leave my lungs. I wanted to shrink, to disappear into the table, but I didn't. I just sat there staring at my brother, the same brother who'd once told me I was lucky to even be chosen by their family. I excused myself to the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red, but I wasn't crying. Not really. I think it was just the shock, the realization that no matter how many years had passed, I was still an outsider to them. A convenient charity case they could joke about. I thought about leaving right then, just walking out. But something inside me stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the quiet, simmering anger that had been building for years. I decided to go back and sit through it. If they wanted me there, they'd have to see me not as a ghost, but as someone who was done being the family's silent spectator. When I got back, the check had arrived. The waiter stood beside the table holding the black leather folder. "Will that be together or separate?" he asked politely. Evan smiled and gestured toward me. "He's got it," he said, raising his glass again. "Right, Liam? Big job now. Plenty of money to treat your real family." My mom laughed like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Oh, that's sweet," she said. "He can handle it." And for a second, I thought I misheard. My brain couldn't process what was happening. The waiter handed me the bill and I glanced at the total $3,270. My hands went cold. My first instinct was to protest, to tell them I didn't agree to this, that I hadn't even ordered half the wine they drank. But then I saw Evan's smirk. That smug, knowing smirk that said he'd already won. That if I said no, they'd turn it into another joke about how I was cheap or ungrateful. The same script, different night. But this time, I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I looked at the bill, then at my brother, then at the waiter, and I slid it back toward him. "Try my brother's card," I said calmly. He booked the table under his name. The color drained from Evan's face. "Liam," he said slowly, his tone suddenly sharp. "That's not funny." The waiter looked uncertain, glancing between us. "Sir," he said to Evan, "the reservation was under your name, correct?" Evan hesitated, then nodded. The room grew quiet. Even my mom's smile faltered. "It was just a joke," Evan said quickly. "We were joking." The waiter looked confused, unsure whether to step back or press the issue. Before anyone could say another word, the restaurant manager, a tall man in a black suit, appeared from across the room, clearly sensing tension. "Is there a problem here?" he asked in a measured tone. And that's when the table finally went silent. Every eye was on me. My heart pounded, but I stayed calm. Evan looked at me, panic flickering in his eyes for the first time. Mom whispered something under her breath. The manager folded his arms, and I realized this was the first time in my life that I wasn't the one shrinking. That was the moment everything started to unravel. The manager's voice was calm, but had that undertone of authority that instantly shifts the air in a room. He stood there with his hands clasped, looking from me to Evan to the waiter like a referee about to make a call. "Is there an issue with the bill?" he asked, his tone professional but edged with mild impatience. The restaurant had gone quieter. You could feel eyes from nearby tables flicking in our direction, catching bits of the tension like static in the air. Evan's confident grin faltered. "No issue," he said quickly, trying to smooth it over. "Just a misunderstanding." He chuckled awkwardly, glancing at me as though I'd play along and laugh it off too. But I didn't. I just sat there, calm, steady, almost too quiet. My heart was pounding in my chest, but outwardly I looked like someone who'd finally stopped being afraid of the noise. The manager raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding." "Yes." Mom jumped in, her voice light, too cheerful. "My boys just like to joke, don't they?" She gave a tight laugh, her eyes darting between us like she was trying to telepathically order me to drop it. "Family humor, you know how it is." The waiter looked unsure. He still held the bill in his hand, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir," he said to Evan, "since the reservation is under your name, the charges are typically placed on the booking holder's card unless specified otherwise." Evan's jaw tightened. "That's fine," he muttered, pulling out his wallet with exaggerated annoyance. He swiped his card, signing the receipt with a sharp flick of the pen, then tossed it back at the waiter like it burned him. "There," he said, glaring at me. "Happy." The manager gave a polite nod, murmured something about enjoying the rest of your evening, and walked away. But the silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the faint clatter of dishes from another table, a laugh from somewhere across the room. But at our table, there was only tension, thick, suffocating tension. Evan leaned forward, his voice low. "What was that, Liam? You trying to embarrass me in public?" I met his eyes. I wasn't the one who made a joke about being adopted in front of strangers. Mom sighed heavily. "Oh, for heaven's sake. It was just a joke," she said. "You're so sensitive sometimes, Liam. Honestly, you need to learn how to take a little teasing." "A little teasing," I repeated quietly. You all laughed. Dad finally spoke, his voice that deep, no-nonsense tone he used when he wanted to end a discussion. "Enough. It was inappropriate." "Yes, but dragging it out makes it worse. Let's not make a scene." Evan smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Yell, Liam, don't make a scene." Something inside me twisted. For years, I'd taken that same tone, the patronizing calm, The unspoken be grateful we even invited you. I'd taken it because it was easier than fighting back. But this time I didn't let it go. I just nodded slowly, grabbed my coat, and said, "You're right. No scene." I stood up, dropped a 20 on the table for the tip, and walked out. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. My breath came out in white puffs as I stood there for a moment trying to process everything. The neon lights from the restaurant flickered on the wet pavement, and for the first time in a long time, I felt detached, like I'd stepped out of a role I'd been playing for years. My phone buzzed before I'd even made it to my car. It was Mom. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. "Liam, what was that about?" She said, her tone sharp now, the fake warmth gone. What about?" I asked. "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "Evan was just trying to include you, and you made a big scene. You humiliated your brother in front of everyone." I let out a bitter laugh. "He humiliated me, Mom, in front of the whole restaurant. But sure, let's protect Evan's feelings." She paused. I could hear her sigh, the kind she used when she was tired of me not falling in line. "You've always taken things too personally. You should have let it go." "Evan didn't mean it. He's just joking when he says things like that." I didn't respond because what was there to say? I'd been hearing the same thing my entire life. Evan didn't mean it. Evan was just teasing. Evan was under pressure, and I was always the one expected to understand. That night, I sat in my car for nearly half an hour before starting it. I watched families walking past, laughing, talking, taking photos together. It hit me how foreign that felt. Being part of something genuine, something where everyone was seen. In my family, love was a performance, and I was the understudy. Over the next few days, the family group chat buzzed nonstop. Evan sent a message first. "Hope everyone enjoyed dinner, except Liam, apparently." He added a laughing emoji. My aunt responded with, "Boys will be boys." And Mom chimed in with, "Let's move on, please." Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody mentioned the toast. A week later, Mom called me again. "We're doing a family barbecue next weekend," she said, at Evan's place. "You're coming, right?" I hesitated. "I don't know, Mom." Her tone softened immediately, like she was switching masks. "Liam, please don't make this into something bigger than it is. You know how much it means to your father to have everyone together." I almost said no, but then I thought about the way Evan looked when the manager approached, the way his confidence cracked for just a second. There was something satisfying about that, and maybe, just maybe, I wanted to see how far they'd go if I kept showing up. So I said, "Sure, I'll come." When I showed up to the barbecue, the tension was immediate. Evan was by the grill flipping burgers with the swagger of a man hosting a political fundraiser. Claire hovered nearby, passing out drinks like she was co-hosting a talk show. Mom and Dad were setting up lawn chairs, and the rest of the relatives were scattered across the yard. The moment Evan saw me, he raised his beer can and mock cheer. "Look who decided to show up," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Don't worry, folks. Liam's not paying for this one." The laughter that followed wasn't as loud as before. A few people exchanged awkward looks. Maybe word of the restaurant scene had gotten around, but Mom still laughed. "Of course she did." "Oh, stop it," she said, swatting Evan's arm. "You boys and your jokes." I smiled tightly. "Yeah, jokes." Evan grinned. "Come on, lighten up. You've been brooding ever since dinner. Can't you take a joke, little brother, little brother?" I hated when he called me that. Not because of the little. I was actually taller than him, but because of the way he said it, like he was reminding everyone I was the lesser one. Throughout the afternoon, he kept finding new ways to needle me. "Liam, grab me a beer." "Liam, you're sitting in Dad's chair." "Liam, maybe you should stick to soda." "Don't want to rack up another big bill, huh?" Every time I smiled and complied, outwardly calm. Inwardly, I was cataloging every comment, every smirk. Claire wasn't much better. She leaned in at one point while we were getting food and said in that faux sweet tone she used when gossiping, Evan told me, "You've always been a bit sensitive about the adoption thing. You shouldn't be, though. It's kind of special, don't you think? Like you were chosen." "Yeah," I said, staring at her. "Chosen by who exactly?" She blinked, thrown off. "By your parents, of course." I smiled faintly. "Right. They remind me of that every time Evan messes up." Her face went blank for a moment. Then she laughed awkwardly and walked away. The rest of the afternoon dragged on, a series of small humiliations wrapped in polite laughter. Every conversation was a reminder that I was the outsider. When the family photo time came, I stood to the side waiting. They lined up, smiling arms around each other. "Come on, Liam," Mom called. "You can stand at the end." At the end, always at the end. I stepped into the frame, forcing a grin, and the camera flashed. But when I saw the photo later on Mom's Facebook page, I realized she'd cropped me out. The caption read, My beautiful family. That night I didn't sleep. I scrolled through old photos, messages, memories, trying to figure out when exactly I'd stopped being part of the family and started being a placeholder. Maybe it was never real to begin with. Maybe I was just convenient until I wasn't. Over the next few days, things got worse. Evan started telling relatives that I'd gone weird, that I was holding a grudge over nothing. Mom backed him up, saying I'd been distant lately. They painted me as ungrateful, bitter, the family's black sheep. The more I stayed silent, the easier it was for them to rewrite the story. But silence had its uses. It let people get comfortable. It made them underestimate you. A few nights later, I got a call from Dad. His tone was gruff, businesslike. Your brother's planning a big anniversary dinner next month. He wants to invite you. You're going. Does he want to invite me? I asked. Or did you make him Dad's side? Don't start. This family's been through enough tension. You'll go, you'll be polite, and you'll keep the peace. Sure, I said. I'll keep the peace. But what I didn't tell him was that something inside me had shifted. For years, I played the quiet, understanding son, the forgiving one, the one who laughed off the jokes and took the blame. But now something colder had taken root. When I hung up, I opened my laptop and started making notes. Because if my brother wanted to play games in public, I was finally ready to play too. And this time, I wasn't going to be the punchline. The anniversary dinner was scheduled for a Friday night at an upscale country club, one of those old money establishments where the waiters wear white gloves and the carpet looks like it hasn't been replaced since the 1970s. The kind of place where Evan loved to show off. It was to celebrate 5 years of marriage between him and Claire. And according to Mom, everyone was invited. By everyone. She meant the entire extended family, cousins, uncles, aunts, even a few of Claire's friends from her yoga circle who always looked at me like I'd wandered in from the wrong movie. For 2 weeks leading up to it, I told myself I wasn't going. I told myself I was done letting them pull me back into their orbit. But there was this gnawing feeling in my chest, like walking away would give them exactly what they wanted. They thrived on the idea that I was the bitter outsider. If I didn't show up, I'd be feeding the narrative they'd built around me. So against my better judgment, I ironed my shirt, polished my shoes, and decided to face the music. When I arrived, the parking lot was already full of expensive cars. Evan's new SUV parked right in front of the entrance, of course. The man loved being the center of attention. Inside the club was dimly lit golden chandeliers reflecting off crystal glassware. I could hear the faint murmur of laughter and clinking glasses before I even turned the corner into the main room. Liam, Mom exclaimed, standing up from her seat as if she hadn't spent the past few months making excuses for Evan's behavior. You made it. She hugged me briefly, the kind of hug that felt more for show than affection. You look nice, dear. Sit. Evan was at the head of the long table wearing a navy blazer and his usual grin, the kind that looked practiced. Well, look who decided to join the living, he said. I was starting to think you'd cut us off completely. Wouldn't want to miss the show, I said, smiling. Claire beamed, clearly oblivious to the tension simmering under the surface. We're just glad you're here, she said sweetly, though her eyes flicked toward Evan as if seeking approval for even that sentence. I sat down across from Mom and Dad. The table was set with place cards, candles, and menus printed on cream paper. Everyone looked picture perfect. It felt surreal, like a staged reunion for a reality show that had been canceled years ago. As the evening went on, I did my best to blend in. I smiled when people talked, nodded when they told stories, and even laughed when my uncle made one of his trademark dad jokes. I kept my guard up but stayed calm. It was easier than I thought until Evan stood up with a glass in his hand. He tapped his fork against it lightly. Everyone, he said, I just want to thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate 5 incredible years with my amazing wife. He wrapped his arm around Claire's waist, pulling her close. She's my rock, my partner, my better half. I wouldn't be the man I am today without her. Everyone applauded. I clapped too half-heartedly, and Evan continued, I also want to thank my parents for everything they've done for us over the years. You guys have always been there, helping us with the house, with the kids, with, well, everything. Mom smiled, tears in her eyes. Oh, sweetheart. Yeah, Evan said with a wink, even helping me out financially when times got rough last year. I don't know what I'd do without you guys. I froze. Mom and Dad exchanged a quick glance, the kind of silent communication that meant there was truth to what he said, but something about it didn't add up. Evan was not the kind of person to admit needing help. He'd rather drown than ask for a life jacket. I leaned in slightly. What kind of help, I asked, keeping my tone casual. Evan smirked. Oh, just some support for a new investment I made. You know how it is. Big dreams take big risks. Dad cleared his throat. It's not something we need to discuss tonight. he said, his voice firm. Evan raised an eyebrow. Why not? Everyone should know how much you've done for me. Mom and Dad were generous enough to give me part of their savings so I could put a down payment on a new property. Kind of amazing, right? The table murmured in approval. Mom smiled tightly, her hand twitching near her wine glass. It was a family decision, she said softly. Wait, I said. A family decision. Evan looked at me amused. Yeah, Mom and Dad said it was the right thing to do. I mean, it's not like anyone else in the family needed it. The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt my stomach drop. Mom sighed. Liam, she said quietly. We didn't think you'd mind. Evan's been working so hard to provide for his family. And I cut her off. You gave him money from your savings. How much? Dad's jaw clenched. Liam, this isn't the time. No, I said, my voice steady. If we're making toast about it, I think it's exactly the time. Evan laughed, raising his hands in mock surrender. Relax, man. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal, I repeated. You took money from our parents' retirement fund. Mom flinched. It wasn't that much. How much, Mom? She hesitated. Just 40,000. The room went silent. Someone coughed. Claire shifted uncomfortably, her smile fading. I stared at her, then at Evan. You took $40,000, and you didn't think to tell me, Dad frowned. Liam, you're not in a position to question what we do with our money. You've always been independent. You've made your own way. Evan needed help and we were able to give it. I felt something inside me snap. You're right, I said quietly. I've been independent because I had to be, because no one ever offered me help. Mom's voice trembled. Don't turn this into a competition. Please, you've always had everything you needed. Everything I needed, I repeated, trying not to laugh. Do you mean the beat-up car I had to fix myself because you said you couldn't justify buying me one? Or how about the time I got into college and you told me you'd already spent enough on Evan's tuition? Yeah, I remember all the generosity. Evan rolled his eyes. Oh, come on. You're seriously bringing that up now. You've always had a chip on your shoulder, man. It's not my fault you can't let go of the past. I looked at him, my pulse pounding. You're right. It's not your fault. It's mine for thinking I was ever part of this family. The words hit the table like a hammer. No one spoke. For a long moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of conversation from other tables and the sound of my own breathing. Evan shrugged. You're overreacting, he said finally. Mom and Dad helped me because they trust me. You just waste the money. Waste it, I said slowly. You mean like how you wasted the money they gave you for that business venture in 2019, or the time you borrowed Dad's car and crashed it, then blamed me? Mom gasped softly. Liam, don't bring that up. Why not? I asked. It's part of the same story, isn't it? Evan messes up and everyone scrambles to protect him. I make one complaint and I'm ungrateful. Evan stood up, his expression tightening. You're making a fool of yourself. No, I said, rising too. You did that for me years ago. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the club manager appeared. Different from the restaurant manager weeks ago, but the same look of polite alarm on his face. Is everything all right here? Fine, Evan said quickly, forcing a smile, just a family discussion. I glanced around the table. Nobody met my eyes. Mom was staring down at her plate. Dad was rubbing his temples. Claire was biting her lip, clearly wishing she could vanish. I took a step back. You know what I said? Enjoy your dinner. I turned and walked out before anyone could stop me. As soon as I reached the parking lot, I finally let the emotion hit me. Anger, disbelief, hurt, all of it rolled through me like a wave. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the realization that I was never considered equal, not even close. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of water and sat at my kitchen table, staring at nothing. I thought about all the times I tried to earn their respect, their approval. All the years I'd laughed at jokes that cut me, smiled through birthdays that felt hollow, attended dinners where I was the invisible guest. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Evan. You seriously embarrassed yourself tonight. Mom's crying. Dad's furious. You should apologize. I stared at the message, my hands trembling. Then slowly I smiled. Not the bitter kind. The quiet, dangerous kind. The kind that comes when something finally breaks free inside you. Because at that moment I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not even close. The days that followed that dinner felt like living inside a fog. Everything looked normal from the outside. Work, morning coffee, the same quiet apartment. But inside I felt gutted. I didn't realize how much hope I'd been holding on to until it was gone. That small, pathetic belief that maybe one day I'd finally be treated like family. But after that night, something inside me just shut off. Mom called the next morning. Her tone was clipped, rehearsed. Liam, she said, we need to talk about your behavior last night. My behavior? I asked, staring blankly at the wall. Yes, she said sharply. You humiliated your brother in front of everyone. You know how many people were there, Claire's parents? For goodness sake, that was supposed to be a celebration. I let out a low laugh. You mean the part where I found out you gave him 40 grand behind my back? She went silent for a moment. We didn't give him anything. It's a loan. Uh-huh, I said. And when exactly is he paying it back? Liam, please don't be petty, she said, her voice tightening. Evan has a family to take care of. You don't. There it was. The dagger wrapped neatly in maternal tone. Right, I said. I forgot. My value's directly proportional to how many dependents I have. She sighed. You're twisting everything. You always do this. You make yourself the victim when no one's trying to hurt you. I'm not the victim, I said quietly. I'm just done pretending you're not playing favorites. Watch your tone, she snapped. We've always treated you the same. That line treated you the same hit me harder than anything else because it was such an obvious lie that it almost sounded cruel. My throat felt tight. You don't even believe that I said. Not for a second. Goodbye, Liam, she said. Call me when you've calmed down. And just like that, she hung up. I stared at my phone for a long time, waiting for it to ring again. It didn't. That was the day I realized something had shifted for good. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in that fiery, explosive way. I was just hollow. I stopped reaching out, stopped replying to the group chat, stopped trying. But that's the thing about silence. It makes people uncomfortable. Within a week, Evan texted me. You really think you're proving a point by ghosting everyone? I ignored it. A few hours later, another message. Mom's upset. She says you're acting immature. Still ignored it. Then a third. Fine, be a baby. You always were. I blocked his number after that. For the first time in my life, I went completely no contact with my family. No calls, no visits, no birthday texts, nothing. The first few days felt strange, like detox. But by the second week, I started to feel lighter. I could breathe again without waiting for the next guilt trip. I threw myself into work, stayed late at the office, went for long runs in the evening, just to keep my mind occupied. But the quiet hours, those were the hardest. That's when the memories crept back in. I'd remember being 13 and hearing Evan tell one of his friends, yeah, my parents adopted him when they couldn't have more kids. He's basically charity. I'd remember Mom saying, you have to understand Evan's under a lot of pressure, sweetheart. Every time he said something cruel, I'd remember birthdays where my cake was store-bought and his was custom, or the Christmas when they gave him a new watch and me a sweater that was on sale. I brushed all of that off back then, convincing myself it didn't matter. But sitting alone in my apartment, I realized it did. Every moment of it had been building toward this quiet, painful clarity. 2 months passed before I heard from them again. I was at work typing out an email when my phone buzzed. It was Dad. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Hey, I said flatly. Liam, he said, his voice stiff. You've ignored your mother for weeks. What's going on? What's going on? I repeated slowly. Is that I'm tired. Tired of what? He demanded. Tired of pretending everything's fine, I said. Tired of acting like I haven't noticed the way you all treat me. He let out a frustrated sigh. You're being dramatic. Families fight. It's normal. Normal, I said, my voice tightening. Dad, you gave my brother $40,000 and told me I should be happy for him. That's not normal. I didn't tell you to be happy, he said defensively. I told you to be understanding. You're single. You have no dependents and you've got a steady job. Evan's carrying more responsibility than you. You could have been more supportive. There it was again, the logic that always seemed to justify his choices. Supportive, I said, almost laughing. You want me to support the person who's humiliated me in public twice in 1 month? He didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had softened. You've always been sensitive, Liam. I'm sorry you feel slighted, but that's just how families work. You can't keep score. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because in that moment I realized something. He wasn't capable of seeing it. None of them were. They didn't think they were wrong. They genuinely believed I was the problem. That realization hit harder than anything else because how do you fight something that deep? After that call, I stopped answering completely. Weeks passed. Then months, the holidays came and went. I spent Christmas alone for the first time, eating takeout while it snowed outside my apartment. It should have felt depressing, but it didn't. It felt peaceful, quiet, honest. Still, there was this ache I couldn't shake. That tiny, stubborn part of me that wanted closure, that wanted them to call and say we were wrong. But they never did. In early spring, I ran into one of my cousins, Maya, at a coffee shop downtown. She froze when she saw me. Liam, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in forever. I smiled faintly. Hey, Maya, how have you been? She hesitated before saying, your family's been talking about you. I raised an eyebrow. I bet. She bit her lip. They said you cut them off for no reason, that you're being difficult. Of course they did. I don't believe it, she said quickly. I was at that dinner, Liam. I saw how uncomfortable you looked. It wasn't right. For the first time in months, I felt seen. Thanks, I said quietly. She hesitated, then leaned in a little. Can I tell you something weird? Sure. Evan's been bragging, she said. He said he's opening some new business, something with real estate. He even said he used family funds to start it. Family funds, I repeated. Yeah, that's what he called it. He said mom and dad were backing him, but he said it like he didn't have to pay it back like it was his by default. I felt my jaw tighten. Interesting. Maya frowned. He's also been saying you're jealous that you've always been resentful because you're adopted. There it was again, the old narrative, the same tired story he'd been telling since we were kids. I forced a small smile. Thanks for telling me, Maya. She looked worried. What are you going to do? I finished my coffee before answering. Honestly, nothing, and I meant it, at least in that moment. I was tired of fighting a battle that was always rigged, tired of trying to prove I wasn't the villain in someone else's story. So I went home, turned off my phone, and sat in silence for a long time. But silence has a strange way of breeding ideas. In the quiet, I started thinking not about revenge exactly, but about patterns, about the way Evan used people-manipulated situations, always landed on his feet because everyone else picked up the pieces. And I realized people like that only get away with it because no one ever holds them accountable. What if I thought someone finally did? That night, I opened my laptop. Not to type an angry email or post on social media, just research. Small things at first. Real estate filings, business registrations, property transfers, the kind of information that's publicly available if you know where to look. And there it was, Evan's name tied to a business he'd registered 3 months ago. The same timeline as the family loan. It wasn't much, but it was enough to tell me something. He wasn't struggling. He was expanding using my parents' money to build something in his name alone. I stared at the screen for a long time, a quiet, almost eerie calm settling over me. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for certain. If Evan thought I'd disappear quietly this time, he was about to learn how wrong he was. The strange thing about hitting rock bottom is that it stops feeling like a place and starts feeling like freedom. There's a kind of peace in realizing you have nothing left to lose. No more approval to chase, no false smiles to maintain, no phone calls you're obligated to return. After years of trying to belong to people who only saw me as a convenient afterthought, I finally felt weightless. The weeks that followed were quiet but productive. I threw myself into work, really into it this time. I'd been working as a systems analyst for a logistics company, and I'd always been the guy who did everything right but never got noticed. The dependable one who picked up slack, never complained, and never asked for more. But something had shifted in me. I stopped playing small. I started taking initiative on projects, proposing new optimization systems, presenting in meetings instead of fading into the background. And for once, people noticed. By summer, I was promoted twice. Suddenly, I wasn't just the quiet guy in the corner. I was leading a small team. My salary jumped, and with it came something new. Confidence. Not the loud, arrogant kind Evan always wore like cologne, but the quiet kind that came from knowing you built something yourself, brick by brick, without anyone's handouts. Outside of work, I started rebuilding too. I joined a gym more out of restlessness than vanity, and found myself enjoying the routine, the rhythm of lifting the focus it demanded. It became therapy. I started sleeping better, eating better, even picking up photography again, something I'd abandoned years ago when life had felt too heavy for hobbies. Every so often, though, I'd catch myself wondering about them, my family, whether they ever thought about me, whether they'd ever realize how deeply they'd fractured things. But every time that thought surfaced, I'd remind myself they had their version of the story and I had mine. And mine didn't include being their scapegoat anymore. Still, the universe has a twisted sense of humor. One morning in late July, as I was finishing up a quarterly report at work, an email pinged into my inbox. Subject line: business inquiry, Carter Holdings. I froze. Carter Holdings, Evan's new company. The message was from an unfamiliar email, but the name attached to the signature, Claire Carter, made my stomach tighten. Hi, Liam. Hope you're doing well. Evan mentioned that your company works with logistics systems and we're currently exploring new vendors for our real estate expansion. I know things have been a bit tense, but I told him we should reach out to you professionally. If you're open to it, we'd love to schedule a consultation to discuss a potential partnership. Claire, I stared at the email for a long time, torn between disbelief and something darker amusement. After all the humiliation, after the jokes, after the money they siphoned from our parents, he was now indirectly asking me for help. I took a deep breath, leaned back in my chair, and laughed quietly to myself. The irony was delicious. I didn't respond right away. I waited a few days long enough to let the anticipation stew on their end. When I finally replied, my tone was perfectly professional. Hi, Claire. Thanks for reaching out. Happy to discuss possibilities. I'm currently managing several accounts, but I can fit in a consultation next week. Please have Evan send over your business documentation and current logistics structure beforehand so I can review. Best, Liam, no emotion, no personal touch, just business. The next day, a thick folder arrived in my inbox. Financial report supplier lists the works. I opened it out of curiosity, expecting to skim through. But what I found stopped me cold. Buried in the spreadsheets were transactions that didn't add up. Large recurring withdrawals labeled as consulting fees, all routed to a private account under Evan's name. The amounts were too consistent, too deliberate to be accidental. It looked like he was moving company funds into his personal account. Classic financial skimming. It didn't take long to confirm it. A quick public search showed that Carter Holdings had already missed a few payments to contractors, and there were online complaints about delayed invoices. Evan's company wasn't thriving. It was crumbling and fast. And now he needed me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one on the defensive. I had the leverage. I didn't even need to use it. Just knowing I had it was enough to shift the power dynamic completely. I met with Claire and Evan the following week at a downtown cafe. The moment I walked in, I could feel the tension. Evan looked uncomfortable in a way I'd never seen before. Stiff posture, fake smile, eyes darting around the room like he was afraid someone would overhear. Liam, he said, forcing a grin. Man, it's been a while. You look good. Thanks, I said evenly. You too. Claire jumped in quickly. We're so glad you could meet. Evan's been raving about how much your company has grown. I turned to her, smiling politely. That's nice of him. I didn't realize he followed my career. Evan cleared his throat. Well, you know I try to keep tabs on everyone. Of course you do, I said. We talked business for a while, or rather they talked and I listened. Evan used buzzwords he clearly didn't understand. Scalability, operational synergy, trying to sound like the expert in the room. But the more he spoke, the more it became clear how deep he was in over his head. After an hour, Claire leaned forward. So, what do you think? Would your company be able to handle our logistics? I folded my hands on the table. That depends, I said. On whether your company's stable enough to handle ours? Evan frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I slid my tablet across the table open to one of the documents they'd sent me. Your financials show recurring discrepancies, money moving from business accounts to a personal one. Yours. His face went pale. That's just internal transfers. You wouldn't understand the structure. Try me, I said quietly. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then defensively, you have no right to accuse me of anything. I didn't accuse you, I said. I just asked for clarification. Claire looked confused. Evan, what is he talking about? He shot her a look, but she didn't back down. I leaned back, calm as ever. I'm not interested in getting involved with a company that might be under financial investigation in 6 months. I said, it's bad optics for us. I wish you both the best, though. I stood up, gathered my things, and left before they could respond. As I walked out, I caught Evan's reflection in the cafe window. His expression twisted in panic, his composure cracked wide open. For the first time in my life, he looked small. After that meeting, things moved quickly. Word started spreading through the business community that Carter Holdings was struggling. Contractors were pulling out, vendors were demanding payment up front, and a few of his investors were starting to talk about legal action. I hadn't said a word, but I didn't have to. The truth was already loud enough on its own. Meanwhile, my life was thriving. Work was booming. My team had just landed a major client, and my boss started hinting about grooming me for a director position. I bought a small condo on the edge of the city, a place that finally felt like mine. No hand-me-down furniture, no guilt attached to it, just peace. And yet, as much as I tried to focus on the good part of me, couldn't stop watching the slow unraveling of Evan's empire. It wasn't out of spite. Not really. It was fascination seeing how fragile arrogance looked when stripped of support. Then one evening out of nowhere, I got a text from Claire. Can we talk, please? It's important. I hesitated before replying about what Evan's in trouble. Real trouble. He won't listen to me. I think you're the only one he might actually listen to. I stared at the message, unsure how to feel. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who'd laughed at me in restaurants and used my parents' money behind my back now needed me to fix what they'd broken. I didn't answer that night. I poured myself a drink, sat on my balcony, and watched the city lights flicker below. I thought about all the times I'd sat in my car after family dinners replaying cruel jokes in my head, wondering what was wrong with me. And now here I was, content, successful, free, and for the first time, they were the ones drowning. It should have felt vindicating, and it did. But beneath the satisfaction was something deeper, a quiet sense of clarity. I finally understood that power wasn't about control or revenge. It was about freedom. The freedom to walk away, to live without needing their approval, to let them choke on the silence they once demanded from me. Still, something told me this wasn't the end. I didn't know it yet, but Evan's downfall was about to drag everyone into it, including me. I didn't reply to Claire's message that night, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. There was a time when I'd have dropped everything to help, when I still believed family meant something sacred, but now I'd seen what family meant to them. It was a hierarchy, a system built on convenience, guilt, and control, and I was done playing at the bottom. Still, curiosity got the better of me. The next morning, I did a quick search. Carter Holdings News. The first headline stopped me cold. Local developer accused of misusing investor funds. The article was short but brutal. Evan's company was under audit for suspicious transfers and missing investor payments. The investigation was still ongoing, but the damage was already done. Clients were backing out, investors were lawyering up, and his name was being dragged through the mud. I should have felt pity, but I didn't. What I felt was opportunity. That afternoon, Claire called. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Liam," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Thank you for answering. Please just hear me out." I leaned back in my chair. "Go on." "It's bad," she said. "Evan's panicking. He's been trying to move money around to cover the gaps, but it's too late. The investors are furious. If this goes to court, we could lose everything. I don't know what to do." I asked calmly. She hesitated. "Look, I know you and Evan haven't been close, but he's still your brother." "No," I interrupted. "He's your husband, not my responsibility." She was quiet for a long time, then in a smaller voice. "I think he's been hiding things from me too. About the accounts, about where the money went. He's not himself anymore." I didn't say it, but the truth was obvious. Evan had finally outsmarted himself. Before hanging up, she said something that caught my attention. "Liam, I think he might have used some of your parents' money too. Without telling them, that stopped me cold. What your mom called me last week, asking if we'd paid her back yet. But Evan swore he'd already transferred the money. I checked the accounts. It never happened." I thanked her, hung up, and sat there for a long time, fingers tapping the desk. Evan hadn't just burned his investors. He'd lied to our parents, used them again. And that's when everything clicked into place. The revenge wasn't about humiliating him anymore. It was about justice, about balance, about finally making him face the consequences he'd spent his whole life escaping. I started with a few phone calls, subtle ones. A contact I had in the finance department at work. A friend from college who now worked in legal auditing. I didn't tell them much, just pointed them toward public filings, discrepancies, and patterns I'd noticed. Within days, more eyes were on his accounts. Quietly then, I paid my parents a visit for the first time in nearly a year. When Mom opened the door, she looked shocked. "Liam." "Hi, Mom." I said, "Can we talk?" Dad appeared behind her, stiff but cautious. We sat in the living room, the silence heavy. Old family photos lined the walls. Evan's graduation, Evan's wedding, Evan holding his baby. My face showed up in maybe two of them. "I heard about Evan," I began. "How much money did you give him exactly?" Dad frowned. "That's private." "Dad," I said softly, "you told me it was 40,000. Claire says you haven't gotten a cent back." They both went pale. Mom's voice cracked. "He said he returned it months ago. He didn't." I said he's been lying and now his company's collapsing. "You need to check your accounts. Make sure nothing else is missing." Dad stood up, his expression darkening as realization dawned. "Are you saying he stole from us? I'm saying you should find out before it's too late." That night, they did. And what they found confirmed everything. Evan had been moving small amounts from their joint account into his business account for months. Not enough to raise flags individually, but together tens of thousands. Mom called me in tears. "We trusted him," she whispered. I didn't gloat. I didn't say I told you so. I just said I know, because the truth was, I'd been that naive once too. But I wasn't anymore. The next step wasn't emotional. It was strategic. Over the following week, I started sending anonymous tips. One to the investor's lawyer, one to the journalist covering the story, one to a local business bureau. Each contained a few simple words and a copy of the transfer documents I'd found online. Nothing illegal, everything public. Just enough to guide them toward the truth. By the end of the month, Carter Holdings was officially under investigation. Evan's accounts were frozen. His name started trending for all the wrong reasons. And just when the storm hit its peak, I made one last move. I met with my boss and proposed a small expansion plan, a side partnership using my department's new analytics system. He loved it. Within weeks, the project launched. We called it LMC Logistics Solutions, my initials. 3 months later, it was profitable. 6 months later, it was thriving. And one evening, while I was closing up my office, I got an email from a property liquidation firm asking if I'd be interested in purchasing a commercial lot in foreclosure. The owner, Carter Holdings Evans Building. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time before replying, "I'll take it." The sale went through quietly. He never knew who bought it. He was too busy dealing with lawsuits and frozen accounts. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not in the petty sense, it was poetic justice. He'd spent his life using people to build himself up. And in the end, I used his collapse to build something real, something mine. A few weeks later, Claire reached out again. Her message was short. "Evans moved back in with your parents. They're barely speaking to him. I just thought you should know." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That weekend, I drove out to the property I now owned. It was an empty office lot, quiet and sunlit. I stood there for a long while, hands in my pockets, looking out over the city. All those years I'd spent feeling small, lesser, like I didn't belong. And now, without even raising my voice, I'd reclaimed my power. No confrontation, no shouting, just calm precision. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed one last time. It was Evan. A message I hadn't seen in years. "I know it was you." I smiled. "I know." When Evan texted me that last message, "I know it was you," I remember sitting on my couch staring at those 4 words until the screen dimmed. I didn't respond again. There was nothing left to say. The truth was already doing the talking for me. Over the following months, I started hearing about the fallout through quiet channels, small inevitable ripples that turned into waves. At first, it was just murmurs in local business forums. Carter Holdings folds under fraud allegations, then a brief headline in the regional paper. Developer's company declared insolvent amid financial mismanagement probe. By that point, Evan's life was unraveling faster than he could patch it. The investors he duped filed civil suits. The bank seized 2 of his properties, and his name became a whispered warning in business circles. "Don't work with that guy. He's radioactive." I hadn't needed to lift another finger. I'd simply let the truth breathe. But the part that surprised me most was what happened inside the family. For years, Mom and Dad had clung to their narrative, Evan as the golden child, me as the sensitive one. But money has a way of stripping illusions. When the bank statements came out, when they realized their retirement savings had vanished into Evan's ventures, it broke something between them that no amount of denial could repair. Mom called me one evening in early winter. Her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Liam," she said softly, "we need to talk." I hesitated, then agreed to meet her and Dad at a small cafe near their house. When I arrived, they both looked older, not just physically, but in spirit. There were dark circles under Dad's eyes, and Mom kept wringing her hands like she couldn't stop herself. For the first time in my life, they looked uncertain. Human Mom spoke first. "You were right," she said, her voice trembling about everything. "Evan, he took almost all of it. He said he'd double it with his property investments. We believed him." I nodded quietly. "I know." Dad swallowed hard, his tone heavy with shame. "He mortgaged our house behind our backs. Liam, he forged my signature on a second loan. We found out last month for a moment. I couldn't even speak." "He what?" "Yeah," Dad said bitterly. "The bank's taking the house. We're staying with your aunt until we figure something out." It hit me then. Not triumph, not vindication, but something quieter. Sadness, maybe. Grief for what could have been if they'd just listened sooner. Mom looked up at me, tears in her eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive us. But we were wrong about him. About you. We treated you like an outsider when you were the only one who ever told us the truth." I didn't know what to say. For years, I'd imagined this moment, them finally admitting it, and I thought it would feel good. But sitting there, I just felt tired. "I don't need an apology," I said quietly. "I just wanted honesty." Dad nodded slowly. "You've always had more integrity than any of us. I see that now." We sat there for a while, just silent. There wasn't much left to fix, but there was a small sense of peace, the kind that comes from no longer carrying someone else's burden. I paid for their coffee, hugged Mom, and left. A week later, I drove past their old house, the one Evan had mortgaged. There was a bank foreclosure sign planted in the front yard. The porch lights were off, the windows dark. I sat there in my car for a long time, watching the house fade into memory. It felt like closing the door on an entire chapter of my life. As for Evan, his downfall only deepened. Once the lawsuit started, he panicked. He tried to shift the blame to a non-existent accountant, then to Claire, then even to the investors themselves. But the evidence was too clear, and everyone who'd once laughed at his charm now turned their backs. Claire filed for divorce 6 months later. She got custody of their daughter and moved to her parents' place 2 towns over. When I ran into her months after that, she looked exhausted but free. She told me Evan was working part-time at a small construction firm, barely scraping by living in a rented basement suite. "He still doesn't get it," she said. "He thinks he's the victim." I nodded. "He always did." She smiled faintly. "You were the only one who ever saw him for what he was." I didn't respond because the truth was I hadn't seen him. I'd survived him. That night I went home and opened a folder on my laptop labeled Past. Inside were all the files I'd collected: financial records, screenshots, articles, proof of everything. I hovered over the folder for a long time, then deleted it. There was no satisfaction left in holding on to it. That was the difference between us. Evan needed to control people to feel powerful. I didn't. My peace didn't depend on anyone's destruction. I was finally free. Months passed. My business continued to grow, and I hired new staff, some of them kids right out of college. I made it a point to mentor them, to give them the kind of encouragement I'd always wished someone had given me. Watching them succeed became my quiet redemption. One afternoon, I got a letter, an actual handwritten letter with no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Liam, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know I understand now. Everything I did, everything I said, it was out of jealousy. You were always stronger than me. You didn't need approval. You didn't need anyone. That scared me. I've lost everything. But maybe that's what I needed to finally see it. Take care of Mom and Dad. They don't deserve what I did to them, Evan." I sat there for a long time reading it over and over. Part of me wanted to rip it up. Another part of me wanted to believe it, but I didn't reply. Some things are better left unspoken. A few weeks later, Mom called again. "He's moving out of state," she said softly. "Starting over somewhere new." "Good," I said. "He needs that." And that was it. That was how the Carter family quietly fractured and rebuilt. Not with a dramatic reunion, not with forgiveness or hugs, but with distance, honesty, and silence. Mom and Dad eventually bought a small apartment downtown. We speak sometimes now cautiously, carefully, like two people learning a language they once mangled. It's not perfect, but it's real. I visit them every now and then. I bring groceries, fix things around their place. I don't do it out of obligation. I do it because it feels right, because I finally get to choose what kind of person I want to be without anyone defining it for me. And sometimes on quiet nights, I think back to that restaurant, the toast, the laughter, the humiliation, the moment my brother raised his glass and said, "Everyone, let's toast a family except for Liam." I remember how small I felt, how powerless. And then I remember sliding that $3,270 bill across the table and watching his face drain of color, the first crack in a mask that would eventually shatter completely. In a way, that moment wasn't just the start of my revenge. It was the start of my freedom. Because sometimes you don't get justice by fighting louder. You get it by walking away and letting the truth do its work. And when the dust finally settles, you realize the sweetest revenge isn't watching them fall.